Community Theater in Middletown. This is Ed Strother talking with Cindy Hanna. The date is August 29th, 1985. The time in the afternoon is 1:25. Cindy and I are seated at my dining room table at 1401 West Ashland in Muncie. It's a beautiful day outside. The sun is shining, but the temperature is not too hot. We have just enjoyed a lunch together with the dean of the college, John Urice, down at Corky's in downtown Muncie. We wanted to talk with Cindy today because she is the only person I know who has been very active in all the essential theaters in Muncie, Indiana. She worked with Irene Belcher's Children's Playhouse. She was very active at Burris Laboratory School. She was active with Summer Theater at Ball State University, and she was active with Muncie Civic Theatre. And from there, she went on to big things. But let's begin with the first of those, Cindy. Let's talk for a few minutes now about Irene Belcher's Children's Playhouse. How did you ever get involved?
I remember it like it happened yesterday. First of all, I have to tell you that to say Irene Belcher, which is, of course, her name, but all of the children knew Irene Belcher as Mrs. B, and her husband as Mr. B. And that's the only way I know to refer to her. So that's what you'll hear throughout the tape. At any rate, when I was about 6 years old, I went to a girlfriend's birthday party. And part of the festivities were that we would go to Muncie Civic Theatre and see the Children's Playhouse do a show called Indian Captive. I had never been in live theater before, never seen a stage show. And I'll never forget walking into Muncie Civic, full of children everywhere, and I knew I was in a theater, but I didn't see a screen, or anything, and there was a curtain. And then all of a sudden, the lights went down, the footlights came up, they had the asbestos piece went up, and there was a curtain, and they parted, and they started telling the story of the Indian captive. And there was this girl with long blonde braids, and I know to get away from the Indians, she had to get under a barrel, right? And I was so afraid that they'd find her and do this, and I was mesmerized. I mean, I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And then during intermission, Mrs. B came out in front, this lovely lady. I know you know her, but for people who don't, I will never in my life meet another Mrs. B. She had a way with children. She had a way with adults. She had a magical face and her blonde hair, and I'll never forget them from all the years that I studied with her. Anyway, she came out and welcomed everybody, all of the children. And she always treated the children as adults when you worked with her, and she expected you to listen to her. She never raised her voice. And she said, "Welcome to the Children's Playhouse. We're so happy to see you all." And she acknowledged our birthday party in the group, and everybody in the audience sang happy birthday to my girlfriend. Oh, I thought this was great. And then the curtains opened again, and we watched the last act of the Indian Captive. Well, when I went home that night, I bounced through the door and I said, "Mom, you'll never guess what I saw. And they were real people, and they were up there, and she didn't get away, and I didn't know we had Indians in Muncie." That was the best part. And my mom then told me about theater. And she said, "Cindy, that's a live show on stage. Those were people acting out parts." I said, I didn't understand what she meant. She said, "Well, the girl is not really an Indian captive, and they're not Indians in Muncie." And I was somewhat relieved and a little disappointed at the same time, because it was so magical to sit and watch the show. And anyway, I acted out the entire Indian captive for my mom. And at that time, I had wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, and I was swimming on the Delaware Country Club swim team. So I wanted in the winter to start swimming on the Y swim team so that I could, be an Olympic swimmer. But my mom said, "The Children's Playhouse is a group of children doing those shows. And if you would like to, you could do that." And I said, "I could?" And she said, "Yes, I know. Mrs. Belcher is her name, Mrs. B." And I said, "You do?" And she said, "I could call her tomorrow if you'd like, and I could see when the classes started." And I said, I would love that. And so the next morning, my mom called Mrs. B, and we saw that the classes would start in the fall. Now, this was a conflict in my life because I was also supposed to go swim. on the winter swim team in the fall. My mother said, Cindy, you cannot swim and do theater at the same time. You have to do one or the other. And I thought for maybe 3 seconds. And just like a child, I said, no problem, Mom. I'll swim in the summer for the Delaware Country Club, and I'll act in the winter, you know. I mean, you must know that when I saw Indian Captive, I remember it now like it was yesterday. The magic that was created in the theater, I wanted to be a part of. I wanted it. I more than anything. I mean, and I can't remember my life before I was acting.
So you got signed up with
Yes.
Mrs. B's
Yes.
Playhouse. Now, what was a class day like? How often a week did you
Yes.
go, and how long were the periods?
Once a week. And
What day?
I went Monday nights from 4 o'clock, 4 to 6, actually. They were 2-hour classes, as far as I can remember.
What did you do in a class?
We would usually, there were about 8 of us in a class. We were upstairs in a little room off of Main Street. You went upstairs that were multicolored as you came up, right? Then you turned the corner and Mr. B had built a stage that had working lights on it, a miniature stage, which in the springtime, when we gave a review, if you will, for our parents, was known as Thimble Theater. Thimble Theater was when the students gave a presentation in the school. Anyway, the actual room where we had the class was then right off the stage, and it had one big mirror so that they could have dance classes in there, and Mrs. B's desk at the end. And she would put all of our chairs in a line or semicircle, and we would do many things. But a typical class was Mrs. B coming in front of us and telling us a story, some story, asking us about the story, you know. What do you think Janie thought about the dog that wouldn't bark? How would she get that dog to bark, okay? And she would tell us a story. And then that must have gone on for maybe 45 minutes, and we'd discuss it. And then she would give everybody a part to do, and we would act out the story. And we'd go up on stage, and you turn off the lights in the studio where we had been working, and then we had a light board that somebody had to work. So we would work the lights, and she would watch us reenact the story. And the first thing you had to do was get up on that stage and stand. Somebody always announced the story. My name is Cindy Hanna, and this is the story of Janie's dog that wouldn't bark. And off I would go, and then the story of Janie's dog that wouldn't bark would come unfold before your eyes. Now, as Mrs. B would teach us theater techniques, we learned about improvisations. We learned that people could come in at any time, and sometimes during these stories, I would be off stage or somebody would, and she'd go in and bring another dog that knows how to bark and see what Janie says about that, you know. So I go, oh, this is great, you know. And I got to be the real snotty girl that had a dog who could bark or whatever. You know, she taught us about all of that, and she instigated all of that. So we learned almost by osmosis. Although I remember classes in the beginning where she taught us upstage, downstage, stage right, stage left. We learned the basics, but we learned most of our acting techniques just from doing the stories. Things like that.
How long were you active with Mrs. B's workshop?
I think I must have started when I was 6 or 7, and I left when I was 16.
So you had graduated from high school?
No, I graduated when I was 17. I worked all through. You could work through high school, and I did that, although the roles were limited. My last roles for her were things like, I was the mother in Hansel and Gretel, you know, and my Hansel and Gretel, of course, went off. Got lost in the forest. But I would do the grown-up roles, if you will. And, of course, I always had this low voice. So I had the voice I have now, even when I was a little one. So most of the time, I played little boys. And my first role for Children's Playhouse, where I actually got to be something, I mean, I don't know if you saw any of our productions. But,
I did.
Well, then you'll know in Winnie the Pooh, you know how Mrs. B would have elephants and bees, and she'd create roles for everybody that she taught, so everybody participated in the productions. Well, my very first speaking role, was Christopher Robin, and I'll never forget it. It was the biggest thrill for me. I had a little teddy bear, and we opened the show by me coming from the back of the house, so that I had to be made up, and I'd put on my big coat, it was in the winter, and I'd take my teddy bear, and I would sit in the back of the house. And I got to watch all these kids come in. And nobody saw me sitting back there. Nobody turned around as they went down the aisle. So I watched the whole audience come in. And then Mrs. Beek would come and she would tap me on the shoulder and she'd say, come on. And I'd come around to that aisleway. That's right, as you look at the theater, it was the left-hand aisleway.
Mm-hmm.
And the stairs went up that side, okay? Mm-hmm. So the lights went down, and I'll never forget hearing the crowd go, and all the kids go, shh, shh, be quiet, it's going to start, and all of this. The lights went down, and the footlights came up, and Fred Henshaw was my uncle. And he was sitting on the other side of the stage. He was on stage left. And I was in the back, and I had to come down the aisle, go to the first post there that held up the back balcony, skip down, and I said, what would you like to do today, Winnie? Stopped there. What would you like to do today, Pooh? And I stopped at my second skip, right by the music pit. And then I'd go up the stairs saying, what would you like to do today? With my little bear, and I'd put him on, and I'd say, hi, Uncle. And he'd say, we're going to tell you the story about Winnie the Pooh. Well, if you could imagine the children, when I came from behind the house, we'd never done this before, and they looked all over for me. They went crazy, not for me, but just for that whole technique and the thrill of being in the magic and causing them such surprise. What would you like to do today, Winnie? They went, what? Where? They saw nobody on stage, and they were so used to the curtains party and everything. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was really beautiful, to do that.
Well, they had to sense some of the magic that you felt with Indian captive.
Yes.
Did your activities with the Playhouse ever conflict with your activities in high school?
No, not with the Playhouse. Well, I mean, I think I was a good student, and I think I was because I wasn't allowed to act if I didn't keep my grades up. But I'll tell you that by the time I was a senior, I wanted no more of mixing my acting with high school. I lived to act, to go to classes and everything. If you must remember me coming to Muncie Civic and doing my homework in the basement, while Mom was working and stuff like this. I'll tell you the real conflict I had. One of the biggest conflicts I ever had. Mom did Miracle Worker for Muncie Civic. And right before that summer, before they were going to do Miracle Worker, I wanted to do the Helen Keller role. And I was maybe 11 years old by this time. And Mom and I wanted to be the mother-daughter duo doing this. And my mother's a wonderful actress and a very methodical worker, and she taught me such wonderful work habits. And we worked all that summer. I learned the alphabet, the deaf alphabet on my fingers. Both hands I could do it. And then Mom would blindfold me, and I would learn then to walk into furniture and what it was like, as part of this is how we spent our summer, working the play and rehearsing it. Well, about that time, at the same time they were scheduled to do Miracle Worker, Mrs. B and the Children's Playhouse scheduled Peter Pan. I guess I wanted to do Peter Pan since I knew what acting was. It was my dream. And here I was with a huge conflict. Another thing that had happened was I experienced a growth spurt that summer, so that I went from being a tiny girl, a little person, that's right, into almost the height that I am now, which was no huge thing, but whatever growth spurt you have there. Well, anyway, I auditioned for Peter Pan, and I got the part. And the auditions for Miracle Worker were the next week. And I wanted to do Peter Pan. And I went to my mom, because I'd worked with her all summer. And also, this was a dream of ours, and I said, Mom, I have a problem. What should I do? I want to do Peter Pan. And there was no guarantee that Mother would get the role in the Miracle Worker, or even that I would. Oh, it was awful. That was the biggest conflict of my life in theater. And my mom said to me, honey, you must do whatever you want to do. I don't feel you have to do the Miracle Worker, because we've been working on it. And she said, whatever you want to do, I'll be happy with. And of course I picked Peter Pan. And I tell you, Dr. Strather, even now, I don't think I was too big to do the role with Mom. Mom would have died trying to throw me around. If you remember, she worked with Elizabeth Evie and Vicki Yoakum, who were two students that I worked with at Children's Playhouse. So I knew them very well, and they were very tiny girls. And Mom did get the role, of course, and she worked with both of them. And I did Peter Pan, and I have not regretted that.
You had a good experience.
Oh, yeah. It was the best thing, all the way around to do that. I think it just worked out really well.
Okay. Let me ask you 2 or 3 quick questions just about highlights.
Sure.
Highlights of high school, college, and civic. What was the highlight at Burris Laboratory School?
On stage?
Yeah.
Well, oddly enough, I wasn't allowed on stage at Burris until my senior year. And thank heavens for Betty Henshaw, because the program was directed by Bob Meadows before that. And he said, I auditioned for Our Hearts Were Young and Gay. And I was a freshman at that time, auditioning for one of the girls. And he took me aside. He said, you read better than anybody. You could do this role like that. But I've got seniors who this is the last time they'll ever be on stage, or have a chance. And so I headed up the makeup department for 3 years. My freshman, sophomore, junior year, I was head of makeup for all the Burris shows. And I was happy to do that because Mrs. B taught me that, and my mom also, that theater is not a star system. It's a link, a chain. And everybody works to make that production go on, and everybody is important as anybody else, and I still believe that. So my biggest highlight on the Burris stage was doing stage door, in my senior year, which I finally did.
As a matter of fact, yes.
Yes.
Now, the highlight of your experiences with summer theater at Ball State.
Yes, was my biggest stretch doing the Life and Death of Sneaky Fitch. I got to be Maroon, the girl that runs the saloon, and I had to sing, and I was terrified of doing this and singing. And the Ball State paper, the girl that wrote that review said something like, she's seen window decorations that were better than I was. I mean, it was devastating. It was a huge stretch. And it was a devastating review, and it ended my singing career. I would like that to go down in the archives on tape. This woman ended my singing career. But actually, that was my highlight because she was such a stretch, and I loved to do her, and I loved that. By that time, I loved the stretch of it. Of course, I loved everything I did, though.
Now the highlight at Muncie Civic, because I know you were also active there.
Yes, well, that was working with Mom in Chalk Garden. That I
remember.
Yes, you directed that.
Yeah.
You were wonderful.
And that was a very good show with a very good cast.
A wonderful cast.
So they are the highlights now, and we've covered all those, although I know we could go back and spend a half hour with any one of those theaters and your experience with them, but I wanted to make sure that we got caught up on what you did after you graduated. I know, just to make a very long story short,
Yes.
that you went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York.
Right.
Now, the highlight of that experience, that 2-year period, how would you...
I know
Okay.
exactly what you're asking. When I got to the Academy, I had wonderful technique, and I could act. And I had some sort of talent, if you will. I wouldn't have been there if I didn't. But I didn't have professional habits. And I didn't understand the professionalism of the business. And that's what I learned at the Academy. The Academy taught me there are no excuses. There's no excuse on stage for not giving the best performance you can give. It was a very hard school for me to go into and learn this. Not that I had been given excuses here, but my Muncie environment was extremely supportive. You were there, the whole community was here. And it wasn't a professional, it's just not a professional environment. That's what I got introduced to there. That's what I understood, they pushed me past my limit. For instance, at the Academy, if you missed 3 classes, not 3 days, 3 classes, you were out. So that means that on a day
Out of the class or out of the academy?
Out of the Academy, that's it. And you know what the excuse was? You died. That's what they said. They told you that your first day. Here's your only excuse. We just want you to know. There are no excuses, first of all. And the only excuse you possibly have is, I died. And that has to be sent to us from a family member. See? So I experienced colds and flu and whatever people get when they go away and just go through a normal 2-year period. But I had to go to mime class. I had to go to dance class.
If you breathe, you could crawl there.
That's right. You went. And I learned now how to get through that and to work through it and work past it. I taxed my body more than I ever thought I could. They taught me the classics, which I hadn't been able to do here because weren't doing a lot of Shakespeare. That's understandable. And I loved that class. I loved, and I hope you can tell, I loved articulation and voice projection classes, things like that. For instance, when I went in, I must have sounded like you had to get up and introduce yourself in voice class. And I got up and I said, "My name is Cindy Hanna, and I'm from Muncie, Indiana." And my voice teacher, John Lemley, said, "Wrong." And I said, "Wrong." He said, "Your name is not Cindy Hanna from Muncie, Indiana." Apparently I had nasalness in it. So anyway, he said, "That's not your name," is what he said to me. And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "No, that is not your name. Your name is Cindy Hanna with an H-A-N-N-A-H, you know." Mm-hmm. They taught me to say, and I had to practice, Cindy Hanna from Muncie, Indiana, with the A's in the front, in the middle, and in the back. I mean, They taught me how to speak. They taught me how to be a professional.
How many productions were you in? Let's say in the 2-year period.
Well,
do you have some guess?
Yes, the Academy is invitational on both years. The first year you're there, you have only classes. You do only classes. And then the last 6 weeks you have exam plays, and you do 2 full-length plays, one every 3 weeks. And you're graded from the moment you get the part until you walk off stage the final night. We give productions at the Academy houses. They have 2 theaters there. So from concept, how you react in rehearsals, things like that, makeup, what your costume is, and everything. Then, out of the group of 200 students that I was with, they picked 60 to come back for the senior year. And when you're there as a senior, you don't take classes anymore. You're in repertory there, doing plays. So I guess my last year I did 6 plays. You play off every 4 to 6 weeks. And then student projects, like I did Picasso's The 4 Little Girls. You know, I don't know if you know the play.
I don't.
It was like something that would be in T100, experimental theater, and also that type of informal theater that they offer at the Academy. And to those performances, the public is invited, and agents come because the Academy is a spawning ground for young talent. They know to come there and see them.
Again, in that senior year, or that second year at the American Academy, what's the high point? What was the really big thing of 6 productions you were in?
It was absolutely wonderful to be in all the productions and to act and not have to be concerned about being prop master. I mean, they ran the theaters professionally, so I wasn't concerned about any of my props or any of those things. I was a professional actor. The high point was doing stage door and was getting, being able to do the role, the lead in stage door, which is the role that I ultimately got seen in by Judy Abbott and got signed with William Morris then right out of school.
Okay. Well, that takes us into your professional experiences. How nice of you to provide that transition. Was Judy Abbott with the William Morris Agency?
Yes.
All right. What was the first job she lined up for you?
She lined up the Girl in the Freudian Slip with Eddie Bracken that I did in Westport, Connecticut. And, of course, the absolute wonderful thing about that was that I had done the Girl in the Freudian Slip summer before that here at Ball State's Theater in the summer program there.
So that came easy for you.
Oh, it was a piece of cake. I mean, I walked in and auditioned, and the young girl functions in this play like Tom in the Glass Menagerie. She has monologues to say, and the scene freezes. It's a tremendous amount of dialogue to do. But I went in and read these monologue speeches, and the director thought I was brilliant. Little did he know that I had spent 2 weeks doing the show here in Muncie the summer before last.
Yeah. Is that the show you toured with?
No, that was a 2-week run just at Westport. Then I went right from Westport to Bucks County and played 8 weeks there, doing 40 Carats and Play It Again, Sam, with a guy named Louis J. Stadlin. I'd worked with Louis J. in The Girl in the Freudian Slip in Westport. Then the next summer I went out with Paul Lynde, and that's the show I toured in. A show written for Paul by Ron Clark and Sam Broderick, the gentleman that had written his TV show. He was a fine comedian. I mean, look, Dr. Strother, comedy, one of the hardest things to do. I worked with 2 masters in my lifetime.
Yeah, you did.
I worked with Paul and with Eddie Bracken. And I'm very close still with Eddie. You know, I do commercials with his daughter, Susan, who's my age. And I see them in New Jersey, and of course Paul has passed away by now.
Yes.
But he was a master, just a master.
He was a Northwestern University man.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
What was that show? I don't believe you gave us the
No,
name.
Mothers Engaged. It was called, and it was an original show written for Paul. Mothers Engaged. It opens on the day of my wedding. I was their daughter, and essentially what happens is on the day of my wedding, they come home from the wedding, and the mother pulls the suitcase out, and she's packing to now move out and live with her younger lover. And Paul calls me up, my father, and makes me come back from my honeymoon to mediate between the two of them, and then it goes on for 2 more acts. How is Dad going to get your mother back, as Bowen say? You know.
Well, now, from the theater,
Yes.
You also went into small screen work.
Yes.
Into the silver screen of television. How do you summarize that? How is your life absorbed by this?
Well, at the moment, it's a little too absorbed by it. It is my life, mostly commercials and TV and film work. I mean, I've worked in all areas now. And it was a hard transition for me because to play in a little box on a TV screen, the technique is totally different from being on stage. I auditioned, I bet, for 75 commercials before I got my first one. And I had been also seen by the agents and the casting directors at the Academy, this wonderful casting director named Merle Pecker from Gray Advertising Agency in New York. She loved me. She and her partner, Claudia Walden. They also saw me in Stage Door, and I met them. The minute I got out of the Academy, they started calling me in to audition for commercials. And I remember Merle working with me and saying, Cindy, I know you can act, and I know you can do this, but you've got to leave your energy at the door. So I came in. I mean, now I know. Now I came in, and I must have just been bouncing off the walls.
Well, that's you.
Yes, energy
was you.
That's right. So you know, Dr. Strother, now when I go in and do commercials, it feels like I'm not acting at all. I mean, it's really true. The least you do is the most you should do on TV. I mean, when I take my paychecks, and I make now all of my income from commercials and soaps and things like that, it's like I want to get to the bank and put it in the bank before they realize that I wasn't really working, that I could act on a stage, you know.
Well, I have seen a couple of the commercials. I've seen the Panadol commercial, which was made about a year ago.
Yes.
And I have seen the, Meals in Minutes or
Great
something.
Meals in Minutes.
Great Meals, the Time Life series, cookbook series.
Yes, yes.
Are there other commercials that I might have seen, or I did see and missed? Or
Well,
something?
there's, first of all, I've done over 100 of them now.
Oh, good
So,
heavens, I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah. I didn't either, but I keep a little book, and I just celebrated my 105th commercial, if you will.
Oh, wonderful.
So, and that's for Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. It starts running September 9th. I've advertised everything on television, from Downy fabric softener to Gold Medal flour to Comtrex, Loris watches, a catalog, Friendly's ice cream, a message that I did as a public service announcement, which means I don't get paid residuals, for warning women against osteoporosis, the bone disease, things like that. Now, I want to use my art as a way to help people. And I'm able to say to the National Dairy Association, yes, I will do this for you for free. You know, it was a 2-day shoot. At the moment, I think what I'd really like to do is get back on stage. I'm tired of being caught in that little box, if you will. Down the road, I have a huge need and want to give to people through my creativity.
Yes.
I would like to write, produce, and direct, continue some of that.
That's great. Well, this is Community Theater in Middletown. Ed Strother talking today with Cindy Hanna on August 29th, 1985. And the time now is about 5 minutes to 2.